Hello and welcome to the SBC podcast. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Andrew Malt. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Pete. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Great to have you on. You have a storied career in the betting world. You've been a professional bettor, tipster, author of numerous books, a pundit, and nowadays also a broadcaster and journalist. Tell the listeners, if you will, a little bit about yourself, your betting pedigree, and what it is you currently do.
Okay, well, I've been into horse racing betting for about 35 years and managed to turn my hobby into my job. And currently, I'm a tipster. I write a daily column for the gg.co.uk website. I write for weekly newspapers, Racing and Football Outlook, and the Racing Post Weekender. I'm a Tote ambassador. I also write a daily column for a website called sportslens.com. So, yeah, lots of fingers and lots of pies at the moment.
Indeed. Yes, there's lots of articles and content that you produce. But you worked on course for bookmakers, you worked online as an odds compiler for bookmakers, and you've also been a professional bettor. So you're coming at this from a very experienced angle, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. And I spent the best part of 10 years or even longer trying to get a job within the horse racing industry. I guess the internet gave me my break because I would put race previews up on websites on a Friday night looking at Saturday's racing. And through sort of racing chat rooms, got to know people who worked within the industry and then managed to get a break through that.
Yeah, well, it's quite a unique role to obtain, really, writing and providing tipping content. I know I've had Daryl Carter, who works for GDs and does something similar to you. But first of all, let's explore how you actually got into it. Was it just racing was a passion for you? You obviously wrote on the forum, but how did you start to make a profit from your betting and obviously develop a following from that?
Well, I became interested in gambling probably through the amusement arcades and the 2p drop and that sort of thing. As a kid, I'd had the occasional football bet before I turned 18, but nothing on horse racing. There was no one in my immediate family who was into racing or betting. I went to university. I met people who were into horse racing and started going to Leicester races and going to the bookies on Saturday and putting the 10p win Yankee on. And I just became fascinated by the sport through that. Why did that horse win and all the other ones in the race lose? And so I set about trying to educate myself and read as many books as I could about horse racing and try to gain as much knowledge as I could that would help me try to win at the game.
Was that a long process then in terms of learning all that information and then actually putting it into practice and making it profitable?
Yeah, very much so. Probably sort of 6 years before I finally started turning a profit. That was largely thanks to the book Betting for a Living by Nick Morden. And one Saturday, rather than spend my 20 quid on betting, I spent it on that book, read it cover to cover twice rather than have a bet or watch the racing. And it changed my approach. One of the things Morden talked about in the book was horse profiling, looking for the ideal conditions into which to back a horse. This one needs 5 furlongs soft ground, or this one can only go right-handed, not left-handed. And one summer I started sort of profiling jumps horses ready for the next season, and had handwritten cards of about 200 horses and what I perceived to be their ideal conditions into which to back them in that season.
And then did that allow you to start betting professionally yourself, or was that a bit further down the line?
No, that was a long way off. I had a bit of initial success. It allowed me to buy a Commodore Amiga and just play sensible soccer all the time with my flatmate when I lived in London. So, and then it was a case of sort of having a number of straight jobs, and then a few years down the line, getting made redundant from my office manager job and giving me the impetus to try and make it in racing. I'd done a few bits part-time. I'd written a chapter in a book about draw bias with Racing Post journalist Graham Weldon. Then I approached the publisher Raceform with an idea for my own book based on my horse profiling. And then it just took off from there, really.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember Sensible Soccer. I spent many a year playing that prior to Championship Manager coming along and taking over.
Yeah, I wasted years of my life on that, I think.
I don't know if it's wasted. I think it was time well spent.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's...
So then obviously you started to get that written work. Was then you got the job to actually write the books. Tell me a little bit about those books. So I think you've written, 20 is it now?
Yeah, that's right. So I started off with, I think it was 1999 or thereabouts, a sort of book about draw bias with Graham Weldon. And then Trend Horses series of books ran for probably sort of 10 years or horse. So, one each, two a year, one for the jumps, one for the flat, and again, just essays on individual horses and what conditions to, back them in, whether they were spring horses, horses who went well fresh, horses who needed a certain distance or tracks or going. Fairly sort of simple stuff nowadays when you can do all this with computers fairly quickly. But they had quite a following. And then, sort of through that, I approached gg.co.uk, gg.com as it was then, with an idea for a weekly column based on the book. And that's when I sort of got my first regular piece for a website.
Okay, fascinating. When there does the work for bookmakers fit into this? Because I think you worked first as a clerk and then as an odds compiler. Tell me a little bit where that fits in, if you will.
Yeah, well, so when I first got to work with Graham Weldon, he was doing freelance tissues for Paddy Power on flat racing, mostly on sprint handicaps. And they wanted someone to do jumps prices. So I started pricing up jumps races for Paddy Power, again, just on a freelance basis. This is pre-Betfair. They would get my tissue before anybody else had sort of seen any prices. So they'd have mine. I'd do a brief comment whether I was sort of, for or against horses or sort of neutral towards them, and just give a little bit of reasoning. And so, they'd use that and two other tissues to determine what early prices they went. I did have a job interview for them back in the day when the internet just started, and was offered the job to trade their internet division. Mm. And it shows how long ago it was, because the internet was completely separate to their phone and shop business. And it was just one person, with a few screens. And they tried to scare me in the interview by saying, do you sort of value your opinion, and, would you back your opinion? Yeah, absolutely. And how do you feel about standing a horse you don't like for £250,000? It was like, wow, that's a ridiculous sum of money. But this was sort of 20 odd years ago now.
Yeah, I've read an interesting book about Paddy Power and their growth, and obviously they're one of the companies that took advantage of the development of the internet. So I imagine that would probably have been a very interesting job to take. So you did the odds compilation for them, building your own tissue prices pre-Betfair, but you also worked on course as a bookies clerk. How long did you do that for?
I did that for a couple of years. Again, that was through the Paddy Power link up. The guy I worked for at Paddy Power, Charles Lee, he introduced me to a Leicester bookmaker, Martin Verrill, who trades as Martin of Leicester. And he said to me, if you're ever looking for work on course, my clerk who's been with me for 10 years is leaving to set up on his own, and just give me a call. So it sort of fitted at the time. I was getting little bits of pieces of writing work, and I needed something. I think I've taken a 60% pay cut since getting made redundant from a regular job. So it meant I could go racing pretty much every day, get paid a decent wage, and learn a lot more about the industry. So yeah, it was a great life.
It probably doesn't sound like work either for you if you enjoy betting and racing. Would you think if you hadn't been made redundant, you would have taken that leap?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very possibly not. I'd like to think I would have had the courage to do it, but I think like with a lot of things in life, I need a little push, and I think that helped me. Mm. But it was great because my job as a clerk, was to do the card, which meant doing the form for the firm and deciding which horses we were going to go with, which ones we were going to lay, horses to be careful of because they had shrewd connections. They might be going into a handicap for the first time and that sort of thing. So. And it was a great education. It taught me how to bet properly. I thought I was a reasonable judge before I started it, but I didn't know 10% of what I know now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much it helped inform you. I guess at that time as well, as a lot of people betting, professional bettors actually on course. Were there connections made there that were quite helpful?
Absolutely. And betting tax had been abolished by this point, because before that it was a massive advantage to go and bet on course because you didn't have to pay the 10% tax and later 9%. But there was still no Betfair. So most of the business that was conducted on course. It was like a circus. The same people, bookmakers, punters, trainers, journalists, going track to track every day. And when I first went there, I was incredibly green. In between races, the boss would walk me around. He'd point people out and say, see him, clock the face. If he has a bet, I want to know about it. He's the headlight for such and such a yard. If he bets another horse in the race when his yard's got the favourite, I want to know about it. And so you'd get to know all the other clerks. That's how I got to know one of your previous interviewees, Simon Knott. We'd used to stand next to each other at certain tracks, both getting rollicking from our bosses at the same time because we'd missed a price on one. And so, and I did it for about a year before Betfair came in, and that's when it was the most exciting. because it'd be a bit like if you ever watched the film Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, that scene where they're trading, orange juice futures on the stock exchange floor and running around handing bits of paper. It was like that, So the Ladbrokes rep comes off the rails, starts taking 2-1 about the favourite. You can see bits of 9-4 and 5-2 behind you. You run around, having all that. And, late 2-1 to Ladbrokes. You've had 9-4 and 5-2 back. Then they're coming back, or Hills are coming in now to take 7-4, and it was just complete carnage sometimes. Fantastic life, but then Betfair killed it slightly when every time someone came to have a big bet, most of it will get hedged back onto the exchanges.
Yeah, so you really had to think on your feet, and obviously had to have thick skin as well, from what I understand.
While you're doing all that, you're standing on the front of the joint, you're taking bets from the public, you're typing them into the computer, you've got a walkie-talkie, and there's a guy on the rails giving you the latest price movements from a different part of the betting ring. And then at times, someone's just handed over a fiver to you for a bet, and you've left them in midair while you've just ran off to because you've seen 6-1 in the back line with Dave Smith when you've just laid 5-1 on your board. So yeah, it was great fun.
And what happened post, obviously, the role working at bookmakers? I understand it's probably not a job you can do forever, especially given the intensity of it and the demands placed on you. Was it then you started to also do a little bit more betting yourself?
When you're clerking on course, you're getting to see so much of what's going on, and you're getting to understand betting more. You might start with an opinion that you want to be with, horse number one, but then, you see it weak in the betting, and you see someone connected with the owner of that horse back something else in the race, and you'd often follow the shrewd money that you were laying yourself, or, again, you'd get to see the horses as well, and you'd see them going to post, and you'd get into sort of try to soak up knowledge from other people. Wendy Perry, daughter of the bookmaker Ivor Perry, who Simon Knott worked for, she was a particularly good paddock judge. She was very good at assessing a horse going to post and looking at its knee action and checking whether it would go on the ground. And she taught me, what to look for there. So there are all these things that you would look at, and having quite a few bets while you were working. And to a lot of bookmakers' clerks, the wages became secondary to punting. You'd obviously do your best, for the firm. Your first priority was to work for the firm and do what you had to do for them. But there was, you would be punting a lot yourself as well.
But you needed to be working as a clerk or on course to actually get all access to that information and understanding about what to bet upon. So one fed the other in many ways. I imagine there's quite a few listeners who perhaps aren't obviously working on course, but maybe are doing their betting as a sideline. At some point, perhaps it's valuable to them, and they make that decision, well, do I leave my job? Do I try and rely upon this to provide me an income? But at some point, you obviously made that leap. You were doing it in a trading room, is that correct?
Yeah, the punting, that came a few years later. I left the on-course game when I started doing the spotlights for the Racing Post. I think I was in the pouring rain at Hereford or somewhere like that one day on a Monday afternoon, and looking around at some of the clerks who are in their sort of 60s and thinking, I don't think I can do this all my life. And I had a trial with the Racing Post to do the spotlights, which for those not familiar with it, it's just like a comment on every single horse in a race, plus the betting forecast, which was the thing they put most importance on. They didn't really care if you backed winners as long as you predicted which one was going to start favourite.
Yeah.
And then it was like, it's working indoors. I kept the link with Martin and invested in a share and a pitch at the Cheltenham Festival. And I'd still come out a few days a year. But I was very much a fair weather bookmaker in the end, and was quite happy to sit behind my computer at my desk and not get wet.
That makes sense.
Rarely left the house ever since.
Yeah, well, that's the life of a bettor many days, isn't it? I think these days, perhaps people are perhaps going back on course, with affordability, etc. And people are actually going for the excitement as well that you can get on course and paid in cash.
When Betfair started up, a lot of people who used to be on the circuit and go racing 5 or 6 times a week, you didn't see them for sort of 6 months at a time. And when they emerged, for a day out, they'd be very pale, and it used to be referred to as computer tan, because they'd been sat behind a PC for the last 6 months.
Sounds, I like it. Computer tan. Yeah, that's great.
I did sort of go full-time punting for a couple of years when the sort of in-running betting took off. And I think I was having a midlife crisis. I just split up from my first wife. I was 39 years old. A friend of mine who'd sort of made a few quid out of the in-running game, he sort of said, look, use an account on my master's account on Betfair. I'll put $2,000 in there. Have a go at the in-running, see how you get on. And I sort of went down to Canary Wharf's trading room for a weekend, turned the 2 into 4, and then sort of started going at weekends and sort of this was in January. By sort of mid-March, I turned it into 17th, and then sort of went off on my own, and had my own master's account, and then ended up moving to Canary Wharf and living there for 2 years, and just sort of trading and running every day, pretty much.
I had the guys from Dragon Bet on, and I think they did some trading and running down in Wales.
Yeah, I know James and David a bit, from on-course bookmaking days, and because they set up their shop in Cardiff, and you'd get charged sort of 30 to 50 quid a day, basically, to sit at a computer with a fast internet connection and watch pictures that were ahead of people who were betting and running at home. At the time, it was, you could sit at home, watch out the races, and be 8 seconds behind what was happening live, or you could sit in a trading room, watch SIS, which is sort of 4 seconds behind, and then sort of later racing TV and turf TV, which is perhaps sort of 3 or 4 seconds behind. And the reason for the popularity of the Canary Wharf one was that they had one of the first sort of fibre optic lines in the country. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't quite Flash Boys in the Michael Lewis book, if you've ever read that, but where they were looking to get their bets in first. But it was a bit like that, and that it was a case of fastest finger first sometimes with the end running, and it helped to have a quick internet connection.
Yeah, so you made hay while you could on that front, or you just had to cover your £50 a day and then obviously make some profit for yourself. It sounds like a good life there, living in Canary Wharf for a couple of years, taking advantage of that. I guess that dried up, and then it was back to your own betting, was it, for a period?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what happened, as it got harder to win in running and people started going to the tracks, when I look back in that sort of second year, most of my sort of income had come from betting my own selections, Tote wins, Scoop 6, and the actual in running wasn't proving as profitable as it had done a year or so earlier. So it was a case of up sticks, move back to the Midlands, and start going to the tracks, initially to bet in running, but punting as well sometimes.
And so that went on for a little while. You're your own professional betting, alongside, obviously, you're still doing the work, writing and the books and the columns that you were doing. So fast forward then, if you will, to where we are now and what it is you bet on currently, because it's interesting to learn about that, but obviously perhaps more pertinent to people these days, like what is it you actually bet on and how you actually bet?
Yeah, so several years ago, I started working as a pundit on William Hill Radio. What I found was that if I was working on Friday, I'd spend all day Thursday prepping, and I've long been a systems person, probably stemming from my sort of fandom of Nick Morden and writing a weekly betting system for Racing and Football Outlook and other newspapers. And so with computers and with the ProForm software, I'd just save all these systems. They'd churn out a list of qualifiers every day. And when I was on the radio, rather than sort of studying the form and looking at each race individually, and there might be sort of 40 or 50 or even more on some days, I would just have a list, a spreadsheet that would churn out all these qualifiers, tracker horses. And so it was almost sort of doing the work for me. I could quickly identify races where I thought I had an edge because, the favourite might be a lay for me on a negative system. There might only be one bet in the race, or there might be sort of 6 horses qualify as bets for me in a field of 8. So I'll just leave that alone because it's, I don't want to back them all. It's too competitive.
And that obviously helps these days because, from what I understand, I know is the ability to get large stakes on is quite difficult, but it's perhaps a little bit easier to get small stakes on a lot of horses.
Yeah, I was never a big punter. I mean, so my daily gg.co selections are 1 point to win, 2 points to win, 1 point each way, that sort of thing. And at one stage, I was betting 150 quid a point. That's less now. But even getting that on was, you were taking sort of 4 or 5 visits sometimes. I even took up running when I lived in Canary Wharf because I could jog to the Betfred shop in Tower Hill with money down my sock, put a bet on, and then jog back to my flat. And it just became such a pain in the backside, trying to get bets on. And you thought, well, obviously it's a lot worse now. And like, rather than take to social media and moan about it like a lot of people do, you think, well, I can't do anything about that. I can't make this firm who've closed me down or severely limited me take my bets. I can't take the 10 to 1 with them when it's the best price, 7 to 1 elsewhere. I can't get best odds guaranteed and double result and all these sort of concessions. So what can I do? It's like, well, I can have sort of 10 and 20 quid on horses. I can bet between 50 and 100 a day. I mean, I sent you my spreadsheet for Saturday, and to give you an idea of what I'm doing. I'm also looking at other avenues now, like the Tote and exotic bets. I still think they're massively underplayed by British punters who are just so used to betting win only or each way that not really grasped the advantages that can be had with exacta bets and trifectas. When you get a race right and you back the winner, if you've got the winner, you've probably got a good chance of finding out what's going to be second as well, and maybe even third. And I don't think we press home our advantage when we're right about a race, as perhaps we should do.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Tote and Scoop 6 and some of the things you're talking about there. I'm not hugely familiar with it. It's not something I've done myself. So probably good to get an understanding of what's on offer and how you're able to take advantage of it. Because I believe you've had some big wins from Scoop 6 where you've won significant sums of money, haven't you?
Yeah, back in the day, around 2007, for a few years, it was the Tote sponsored Channel 4 Racing, the terrestrial broadcaster of British racing at the time, and they put a lot of money into advertising the Scoop 6, which is a jackpot style bet, usually on the the 6 trickiest races of the day. It cost £2 minimum stake, and obviously you could do a perm that would cost thousands, covering lots of horses. Mm-hmm. And of course, if the bet wasn't won, it would roll over to the following week. And there was also a bonus fund. If you won it on week 1 and got all 6 winners, you then got to play for the bonus fund on one of the trickiest races the following week. And that bonus fund would often run into 7 figures. Mm-hmm. And so again, the big syndicates came in. Harry Finley was one of those who was famous for attacking this bet with lots of others. And I got some friends together, family, people I work with on course, to all put a few quid in one day, and then it just snowballed from there, really. And we were lucky enough to win it 3 times.
And they obviously set you up quite nicely, I imagine, with those sums and use your expertise to do that. But what's it like currently? Because I believe Betfred took it over, made a mess of it, and now they're no longer involved. Is that right? And what's it like currently in terms of the Scoop 6 and Tote? Because I know you are an advocate of it at the moment.
Yeah, Betfred certainly ran the Tote down, and we're just, I think, keen to get back what they paid for it with a bit more on top. But it's recently come under new management, and they're very much punter-focused and trying to give the value back to the punter. Now, when the pari-mutuel first started in France, I think the takeout was something like 5%. And they're not down to that yet, but they're certainly heading in that direction. Now, because, for example, you can bet in a William Hill or a Ladbroke shop or online with those firms into the Tote. But you go to the Tote direct, tote.co.uk, and they will give you 10% extra on top of your winnings. That's basically the 10% cut that a third-party bookmaker would be getting. That's now going back to the punter. When they did a lot of focus groups and said, why don't you bet with the Tote, just talking about regular racegoers, regular punters? Well, I said, because you don't know what price you're getting. If I take 20 to 1 with a bookmaker, an off-course bookmaker, I know that I've got 20 to 1 whatever happens. So they introduced the SP guarantee. So if you bet with the Tote now on course or on their Apple website, if the horse returns 10 to 1, you'll get at least £11 back for your pound, plus 10% on top. Mm-hmm. So this now provides arbing and hedging opportunities as well, because if you look at a favourite on Betfair, there might be 204 to back, 206 to lay. You can back it at that price and pay your 2% commission, or you can take even monies with the bookmaker. And you back it with the Tote, you're getting that £2 return plus 10%, the equivalent of 11 to 10 against. So there's a lot going on and a lot of value now that I still think a lot of punters perhaps don't appreciate. I should say at this point I am an ambassador for the Tote, and I've been doing some promotional work for them, so I don't want to sound this like an advertorial. And the World Pool, of course, is the big thing as well, with like the Royal Ascots, the Glorious Goodwoods, the Cheltenham Festivals, when the money comes in from overseas, from Hong Kong, from the USA, from South Africa, etc. And this swells the pools and can also lead to arbing opportunities when horses are paying massively different, with on the exchanges as they are in the Tote pools.
And what type of customer is using it? Is it people that perhaps are unable to bet with traditional bookmakers, or perhaps looking for that big payout? Because, 6 horses on any given Saturday on a big race day, there's probably a lot of punters, people listening to this, who have a selection for each of those races. What type of customers are actually using the Tote these days, or coming to the Tote?
Yeah, more and more professional punters. I certainly think it used to be racegoers having the £2.50 each way, or the fiver. People playing the place pot. And it wasn't, if you wanted a win bet, it wasn't the first port of call for a lot of punters. But now that it's the SP guarantee plus 10%, I think it's attracting a lot more people. It certainly seems to be growing. We've been running some betting competitions, betting tournaments of the big race days, and you're up against perhaps 2,000 people and but there's sort of a grand for having the biggest winning total on the day. There's prizes for beating the Tote's resident punter, and he starts with a bank of £100. And so when we started these a year ago, there was sort of 100 people, and now it's getting on for 3,000, I think.
Mm-hmm. So volume's growing. More people are doing it, and obviously stakes probably sound like they're increasing. So it makes sense that you might be ambassador for them, given your wins on the Scoop 6 and your success.
Another thing as well is that if you are betting on the Tote, you're not sort of hunting around for early prices, looking at odds comparison sites, having the frustration of getting knocked back, and it does take a lot of the stress out of punting if you're betting closer to the off as well. And you've got additional information that perhaps you haven't got if you're betting in the morning. You've maybe seen the horses go to post, you've seen the horses in the paddock, and you've also seen the market moves as well. And that can be pretty crucial, obviously.
Yeah, so there's certainly an option there for people to consider, something I'll look into, certainly. And for those listening, go check it out. We'll slide in some links we'll talk about at the end of the show, and slide into the show notes for people to find out more. So, but then back to your own betting alongside the Tote, I guess you mentioned there you were going to shops. I guess that might be closed off to you these days, knowing how shops are for successful, well-known punters. But is it exchanges mainly as well that you use?
Yeah, I use a mixture because for example, there's a race at Punchestown tomorrow, the 340, like 20 odd runner handicap hurdle. I've bet 4 horses in there between 10 to 1 and 50 to 1. But I can go to sort of 2 or 3 firms and bet them all to win £500 or something like that. And I'm fortunate that because I've worked for Hills and had a relationship with them when I was working on course, that I can get a reasonable bet with them. Same with Coral as well. With Hills, I had to do Scout's honour and promise that I would never arb. And that's been useful. And again, I did last year manage to reopen a couple of accounts that had been closed. Someone told me that because of the Data Protection Act, they're only allowed to keep information on you for something like 4 years or maybe 5 years. So I reopened a Bet365 account. I'd moved house since. I've obviously got perhaps a different bank account, different phone details. Just reapplied for the account as new, put my £100 in, got my £100 bonus, and that managed to last just over a year by not being silly or greedy and having sort of 10, 20 quid on various horses.
Yeah, well, there you go. Another little tip for people there, isn't it? After a few years, if you haven't logged in, especially if you've moved house, got a different bank, give it a try.
Yeah, I think as well, at Bet365 at the moment, I can back one to win a fiver. And it's no point doing that and having the account open, click close account, and then set your alarm clock for 4 years' time and see if you can reopen it, because the staff have probably changed. They can't keep the information on you. You might be able to have another roll of the dice.
And so you're about finding solutions to obviously use exchanges, shops, and the different methods we've talked about here. Rather than complaining about it, we're actually trying to find a solution, how you can get on, perhaps using friends and family.
It's about adapting, isn't it? This week there's been a story in the Racing Post. I haven't sort of got around to reading it yet, about someone who's sort of in trouble for multi-accounting. You've got to play the cards that are dealt, and there's still a lot of people, a lot of in-running players I know are sort of moaning what the game's like now. There's no liquidity and it's a lot harder and it's not as good as it was 5 or 10 years ago. But you can't look back, you've got to look forwards. It's no good. It's fine if you're the only corner shop in the town, but if they open a big Tesco's next to you, you're going to go out of business fairly quickly, and it's no good just looking back to how good it was in the old days. You've got to adapt or die, basically, in this game.
Yeah, that 365 article's been interesting. I've seen numerous tweets and people saying, "Oh, definitely the game's gone now." And if I had £1 for every time I've heard the game's gone, I'd be very rich on the back of that. So, yeah, it's obviously a concern, but for many punters, especially if they use that option to get on. But are you not concerned, though, about the direction of travel? Because we also got things like affordability limits, liquidity on Betfair reducing, the exchanges reducing, the black market, perhaps a lot of money going into there. You're not concerned about the direction of travel, especially as a horse racing fan, because horse racing and betting there's such synergy between the two. And if people can't bet on horse racing because they're not allowed to deposit more or because they've been banned, surely will have consequences for the industry like horse racing.
Well, I think the social stigma as well associated with betting is almost like the new smoking now, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you say you like a bet, you're immediately seen as some sort of degenerate. And going back to first one, the Scoop 6, I had to withdraw the money to a credit card, to a Barclays card. The only way I could get it out was to go into the branch and withdraw like £250 a day and pay commission on top of that. I thought this was going to take a long time. So I spoke to them and said, what do I do? They said, welcome. Oh, we can transfer this to a current account and, blah, blah, blah. And they sort of said, where did the money come from? I said, I wanted betting on horses. Oh, really? And I said, yeah, that's what I do. And I showed them one of the books I'd written. And they said, oh, so you're the person to come to for the Grand National, are you? And they said, oh, I'm going to Leicester. It's all very sort of jolly and absolutely, red carpet, come in. You do that now. You're the local drug dealer. So, attitudes have changed. And obviously, there will be some people who are in a position to, in 10, 20 years' time, in positions of authority, or perhaps students now are protesting against horse racing and wrongly think it's cruel. And we might go down the route of not being able to have jump racing and then flat racing being attacked. So that's what I worry about, I think, more than sort of affordability checks.
Like changing attitudes and how people, certainly it feels like that to me. There's lots of different things going on in the horse racing sphere at the moment, and it needs some strong leadership. I'm not quite sure whether that's on view at the moment from the BHA and those in power, but certainly I hear the points on how betting is viewed, because I was looking at the comments. There's a podcast I follow called The Football Ramble, and they had adverts on the podcast, and there was some criticism about the adverts. It's a free podcast, and a lot of the criticism it's about betting. I don't mind the adverts, but they're all about betting, and that turns me off. So there's a real crisis, I suppose, for the betting industry, where it's viewed as dirty money. It's viewed as taking advantage of vulnerable people. Many of the stories that I've, and the narrative that's been front and center and about bookmakers and how they've taken advantage of people. So I feel like there's that issue at play at the moment for people who bet, and those like you and I who do it for a profit and we do it enjoyably. We are grouped together with bookmakers and people like that. And it becomes difficult, doesn't it, I suppose, to just, to tell people what you do, or to try and, whether it be when you talk to the bank or people in everyday walks of life. Do you find that's a struggle, that people view you in a certain light these days because you're involved in betting?
Yeah, they're much so. And, because every time there's a story about somebody whose betting experience has ended in tragedy, then you're sort of told with the same brush that you bet, therefore you must be a compulsive gambler, and you will just keep going as long as possible until you lose your house. And that's obviously not the case. But it's trying to get that message across that, like responsible drinking and having the odd glass of wine with your Sunday lunch, you can have a £1 lucky 15 on a Saturday and enjoy watching it on ITV at home. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're addicted for life.
No, we're not degenerates. We have a passion and we enjoy betting. If you were 18 again and looking to choose an industry to work in, would you look at betting potentially, or would you advise people to try something else?
Good question. I'd probably go down the betting route. It's a great way I find it a great way to spend your time. And I still look at it as, like some people would doing a crossword puzzle. There's 10 runners in the next race. 9 of them are going to lose. 1 of them is going to win. I want to find the one that's going to win. And I'll start by perhaps trying to eliminate some of those 9 that aren't going to win. And I think it keeps the grey matter ticking over. I guess it keeps us busy between being born and dying. And at the end of the day, it's pretty trivial, isn't it? Just a load of horses running around a muddy field. What else are you going to do with your time?
Well, exactly. And it's that puzzle aspect. I hear that from many people, trying to solve that puzzle and the excitement or enjoyment you can get from actually being right, or how it feels when you're wrong.
I'm in a family group with Wordle, and you get to do that once a day, and I'll try to explain why. With racing, I get to do it every 5 minutes if I want to.
Definitely, yeah.
Some of them still don't grasp it, and you just won't. You'll never convert them. And if you win, you're lucky, and it's only a matter of time until you lose your shirt.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's like a dirty habit, isn't it? Like there's something you keep a secret from your family because what's Sandy doing? Always betting.
Funny enough, my mother was a Methodist, and when I was 18 years old, I used to have to keep The Sporting Life under my mattress rather than a copy of Playboy, and because she was very much anti-gambling. Well,
my experience is when you're told at 18 to not do something, you invariably want to go and do it and find out why. So
yeah, trust me, that still works. That still works at 53.
Good to know. So let's have a quick chat as well about your media work currently, because people obviously will be able to find out more about what you produce. Tell me a little bit. You're at GG's, you're at Sports Lens. So you do, is it daily columns, weekly columns? I know you do some podcasts and video casts. So tell me a little bit about that and where people can find you.
Yeah, so gg.co.uk, you just sort of look at authors or tipsters, I think the link is, and you'll find my daily tips there. But again, I tend to put a lot of reasoning behind it as well. And a lot of people who followed me, they tend to use it in addition to their own betting. And they might have looked at a race and they want to know if I particularly like or dislike something in the same race. And I've got lots of people on Twitter who will get in touch and say, "Oh, I disagree with you about that one," or "I didn't think it would go on the ground." Absolutely fine. I don't win on every race, and I'm always happy to hear other points of view. And Sports Lens is similar as well. I write two columns for that site, sportslens.com. One of them is spread betting, and another one is just sort of daily statistical picks. So I've got over 1,000 saved systems on ProForm at the moment, and I tend to go down the rabbit hole researching new systems, and I've looked at some weird and wonderful things recently, like how seasonal affective disorder has an influence on jockeys, and particularly looking at the big name jockeys who go out to winter in Hong Kong, Japan, Dubai, and then come back in the middle of February, and all of a sudden they're at Wolverhampton, and it's like -10 with the wind chill factor on a Saturday night, and these people are human after all, and that would depress me if I was a jockey, to sort of come from getting a share of massive prize money, riding in top races in front of 1,000 adoring fans in the sunshine. So, and a lot of these systems perhaps come to nothing, but then I keep going and I keep looking at new angles. And I think that's the thing to do. Look at new angles, look at these new trainers that are up and coming, oppose those trainers who are set in their ways, who've been doing the same thing with sort of moderate success for sort of 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And, look at those who are up and coming. And there's a lot of silver spoon trainers, as I call them still, who perhaps only in the game because their parents were, and they kind of like inherited the racing yard and the owners that came with it, and their horses are still over bet and based on the reputation of their predecessors. So there's a lot of angles. I tend to look at opposing last time out winners, particularly on the flat, assuming that a horse probably won because it had everything dropped right. It was well drawn. The pace of the race was right. It was on the quickest part of the track, and the market still overreacts to last time out form, particularly the early market. If you can get on the night before, odds compilers are very lazy, it seems, and they will just look. If you just take any race that's going to be run, on the all-weather tomorrow, perhaps the horse who won last time out gets installed as a 7-2 favourite. Two horses were second; they're 4-1 each. The horse was third; it's 9-2. If you can find a horse who ran poorly last time with a valid excuse, he might bounce back today, then you've already got a good chance of beating the market, I think.
So it's a real educational aspect to what you do. So you're not just saying back this horse at 5-1 or 10-1. You're actually outlining a case for that horse, why you've selected it, so people can help inform themselves and learn maybe about some of the theories behind your selection. Do you keep records of performance? Then do you have any figures that you might be able to share for them, or?
Yeah, I mean, last year my selections on GG at advised prices, if you're fortunate enough to have best odds guaranteed, I've made a profit of 306 points.
Mm-hmm.
When I first met Simon about 20 years ago, he started betting my picks to £2.50 a point. And so it helped him get the deposit for his first flat. And I think he still bets sensible stakes, 15 or 20 quid a point. He's kept meticulous records. He used to do it in a handwritten ledger. Now it's all on spreadsheets. And at the end of every month, he gives me the profit and loss based on advised prices and based on SP. But I mean, again, we had Shalir last year who won it on Champions Day at 80-1. But I think I put him up as advised at 33-1. So again, that best odds guarantee is massive. I've got a few other people on Twitter as well who will, when I put the figures out, they will say, I've got it as X or Y, or I do yours to Betfair SP, and they're making this. So I think we've had one losing year on GG out of the last 20, and I think that was 7 points, and that was about 15 years ago. So I'm trying. I had a disastrous February this year. I think I lost 48 points, having made about 36 in January. But these things will happen. So start with a bank of 100 points. Have a couple of quid on them and see where you are in a year's time.
Well, it sounds like certainly one that we need to look at. That's our main job, to look at and reach out to Simon, see what he's got, and to see if we can start to track performance. Because, and as you say, even the best tipsters like you, best experts do have losing months. It's part of the game. And it's about being patient to overcome that. And I assume as well that odds movement is, because we see with, I know there's probably, I don't know if he gets more visits to his website, but the likes of Hugh Taylor, their prices go exceptionally quickly, and it becomes a fastest fingers to get the prices. Do you find there is much odds movement with your selections after they go up?
Yeah, it's funny, really, because when you're sort of first doing this, you tend to be sort of perhaps a bit lower on confidence. You should be, and then you sort of realise that, crikey, I've caused that market move, and I suppose 1,000 people, all have a tenner on around about the same time. That 10 grand in a morning market is going to move things pretty quickly. But again, you could go back to Hugh Taylor. I mean, he's a fantastic tipster, isn't he? Absolutely brilliant. He's got all his results on the website. But again, even if you're not backing his selections, reading directions he's coming from and what he's doing is obviously very valuable. You'll see that when it's entry, when it's some of the big meetings, he's tipping Chelmsford's evening meeting, and he's specialising in the all weather a lot. And if he identified that the race wasn't run to suit those who were ridden patiently, he's back the fourth who do best of the hold-up horses. Maybe there's horses in sixth and seventh you put in your trackers because maybe he's going to tip those next time. So you can almost sort of preempt him sometimes by looking at those things. And again, it will just give you an idea of what people are doing, what angles they're coming up with, and what direction they're coming from. You'll see horses he tips from certain yards that are 8s into 4s and then 4s out to 20s, and you think, maybe I shouldn't be trying to nick the price of that particular outfit. And maybe for a horse from that yard in future, I don't want to bet them until the last one's going in the stalls, and I'll see what the final price is going to be. There's always different angles.
Yeah. So I think from the current setup, in terms of how prices move and how sensitive bookmakers are to people like yourself and Hugh and others that have a great record, and understandably they're going to cut prices if you put up a value bet. It's about reading the context, understanding the context of the selections and educating yourself a little bit more rather than just blindly following each tip, regardless of the price. If the price has gone, well, there's not much you can do about that. But yet you can certainly try and read between the lines, try and learn a little bit about the strategies from people like yourself. So it does make sense to me.
There's still certain areas that are fairly sort of under-discussed in British racing, particularly draw and pace bias. And we saw at the Greenham meeting at Newbury on Saturday, it was a massive advantage to be drawn low. It was obvious. You started suspecting it at the first race, although it was on the round course, the two that raced closest to that far side rail were 18 to 1 and 40 to 1. The first straight track race, again, it was low numbers all the way. And then you could sort of start messing around with combination exactas, trifectas, throwing a few quid at the bigger price, low drawn runners. I mean, Latam was running a huge race in the Spring Cup. I think the first three were drawn sort of 2, 4, 12 and 1 or something like that. And he's run a fantastic race. That will go down as a disappointing run for a lot of people because the favourite was beaten, but he was a favourite. He raced on the slowest part of the track and was probably valued for much more than he got beaten by. So those are things to look at as well, and particularly over jumps when the inside of the track is badly cut up and it's swamp-like after a few races, and you look for horses who ran well on the wrong part of the track and put them in your tracker, and before you know it, you've got a good bank of horses that you can be betting when they run in future.
No, that sounds good tips there, yeah, to actually observe a little bit about what's taking place, and the tracker element does make sense. I know you've got a lot of systems and you use ProForm and far too many to keep track of yourself, no doubt. So having those reminders about, oh, yes, that's what happened, and building that body of knowledge and experience sounds ideal. So how about plans for the future? Is it much the same, continue to post on the various websites that you currently do, or anything likely to change or adjust?
Yeah, I mean, I should probably try and do less work at some point, but I just enjoy it too much. This time of year, when there's brighter in the mornings and the flat season's getting going, just a pleasure.
Yeah.
But the Tote are trying to revitalise the Scoop 6 bet. I've been sort of doing some consulting with them as to how we can make it more appealing to probably reduce the minimum unit stake for the jackpot and the play spot. You can play the jackpot and play spot for 1p unit stakes now.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to do full cover, in these sort of big festivals like Cheltenham and Royal Ascot, you can put several horses in some of the races if you think they're impossible. I wish I'd done that in the Fox Hunters at Cheltenham when it was a complete disaster race and it paid massively. And again, I think they'll do that with the Scoop 6 as well, reduce the unit stake from £2 and make it more affordable for the smaller punter, which seems to be the key, I think.
Certainly, yeah. So, well, I mean, it sounds like I'm certainly going to go check out the Tote myself a little bit more and see what's on offer there. So, how about if people want to get in touch? How can they reach out? You're active on Twitter, are you not?
I'm on Twitter at Trend Horses. So if you contact me on there or got any questions, I'm always happy to ask. Can't guarantee I'll get to you straight away, particularly on Mondays, which is my sort of mad writing day for Racing and Football Outlook and the Weekender. But I will endeavour to get back to you as soon as I can.
That sounds great. And I'll slide in some links to your columns and your Sport Lens and GG, so people can obviously learn more about you, follow you, but also see some of your informed content online. But Andrew, it's been a pleasure chatting to you today. I feel like I've learned quite a bit. You've got, like I said at the start, a storied history in the betting and bookmaking world, and you continue to show people how to beat the bookmaker, how to make a profit, and to adapt and evolve. And thank you ever so much for sharing your expertise today.
Yeah, cheers, Pete. Thanks for having me on.